They weren't tried, they were hired. After World War II, some of Nazi Germany's most dangerous minds didn't face judgment at Nuremberg. They got paychecks from the US government. They were rocket engineers, chemists, physicians, many of them Nazi Party members. And instead of being punished, they were secretly brought to America under a classified program known as Operation Paperclip. These scientists would go on to build missiles, revolutionize space travel, and reshape Cold War strategy. But buried beneath that progress is a disturbing truth. The line between justice and power was quietly erased. Before we uncover how Nazi war scientists became American heroes, don't forget to subscribe to The Lost Chapter, where forgotten history makes unforgettable stories. May 1945. Nazi Germany collapses. The Allies have won the bloodiest conflict in human history. But while the world celebrates peace, military intelligence agencies in the US and Soviet Union are already moving. Fast. Not for land. Not for gold. But for mines. Germany's wartime scientific machine had developed technology that stunned the world. From jet aircraft to guided missiles and chemical weapons. The fear? If the Soviets got those scientists first, they'd leap ahead in the next conflict. So while Europe smoldered, the US quietly launched a new mission, not to defeat Nazis, but to recruit them. Operation Paperclip began in 1945. It was a secret initiative led by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, tasked with bringing over German scientists and engineers with specialized knowledge. At first, it was called Operation Overcast. But when officials began attaching paperclips to the files of particularly valuable scientists, the nickname stuck. President Harry Truman approved the plan, with one condition: no one involved in active Nazism or war crimes could be recruited. That condition was quietly ignored. To make the transfers legal, US officials often altered personnel files, deleting SS membership, removing evidence of crimes, or downplaying direct connections to Hitler's war machine. By the end, over 1,600 German scientists were brought into the US, many with pasts darker than the public would ever know. Most famous of them all was Wernher von Braun. He had been an SS officer and the lead engineer behind the V-2 rocket, a weapon that devastated London and killed thousands. That rocket was built using forced labor from concentration camp prisoners. Many never survived the conditions of the underground Mittelwerk facility. After the war, von Braun wasn't prosecuted. Instead, he was put on a train to Texas. Another was Arthur Rudolph, a propulsion specialist also tied to the V-2 program. Decades later, he quietly left the US under investigation for his role in Nazi war crimes. Then there was Hubertus Strughold, known in America as the father of space medicine. Documents later linked him to human experimentation during the war. These weren't obscure men. They were placed at the heart of America's scientific rise. In aerospace, weapons, and even healthcare. Their pasts? Paperclipped into silence. To understand why this happened, you have to understand the mood in Washington after World War II. The Cold War was taking shape. The Soviet Union, once an ally, was now the next threat, and the Soviets were moving fast. They launched Operation Osoaviakhim, their own program to capture German scientists. Thousands were taken to work on Soviet missiles and defense systems. To US officials, letting those mines fall into Stalin's hands was unthinkable. Technology, not ideology, would shape the next war. So the logic became simple. Better they work for us than against us. And just like that, former enemies became strategic assets. To make it all work, history had to be rewritten. State Department officials flagged many of the scientists as ineligible due to their Nazi affiliations, but military intelligence overruled them. Dossiers were cleaned up, SS ranks were removed. In some cases, entire files vanished. These men were relocated to places like White Sands, Huntsville, and NASA research centers, far from public scrutiny. Their work continued, but now under new flags and new narratives. The public never knew, not for decades. Wernher von Braun didn't just get a second chance. He got a spotlight. He became the face of NASA's space program, eventually leading the team that built the Saturn V rocket. The same rocket that is said to have carried Apollo 11 to the moon. But this is where the story takes a strange turn. Because the man who once bombed London became the architect of America's greatest space achievement, and the public was never told the full story. Even stranger, in the 1950s, Walt Disney himself collaborated with von Braun, featuring him in a series of films like Man in Space. These broadcasts introduced millions of Americans to the idea of space travel, and introduced von Braun as a visionary, not a former Nazi. Propaganda, rehabilitation, or just clever storytelling. And then there's this. On his gravestone, von Braun chose just one inscription. Not a scientific formula, not a quote about rockets. Just Psalm 19, verse 1, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." That word, firmament, refers to the dome-like structure described in Genesis, a solid boundary separating Earth from the heavens. Some wonder why a man who devoted his life to breaking through the sky would choose a verse suggesting it was sealed shut. It might mean nothing, or it might mean everything. Years later, in 1962, the US launched Operation Fishbowl, a series of high-altitude nuclear tests that exploded warheads in the upper atmosphere. Officially, it was to study EMP effects and missile defense, but some have speculated it had another goal: to test the limits of the firmament. According to biblical cosmology, the firmament is a solid boundary, created by the Most High on day 2 of creation. Some researchers believe Fishbowl was an attempt to reach or even break that barrier. The naming is odd: Fishbowl, a closed system, and part of a larger operation called Dominic, which in Latin means "of the Lord." There's no proof this was the real motive. But in a world where war criminals became scientists, where files were altered and truths buried, even the wildest theories no longer feel entirely impossible. Just 1 year after World War II, in 1946, the US launched Operation Highjump, a massive military expedition to Antarctica, led by Admiral Richard Byrd. It involved over 4,000 troops, destroyers, aircraft, submarines, all supposedly for cold weather testing. But why such firepower? Years earlier, Nazi Germany had conducted an expedition to Antarctica, claiming a region called Neuschwabenland. Some believe a secret base was built there, and that high jump was meant to investigate or eliminate what remained. There's no proof, but the timing is strange. And just over a decade later, the Antarctic Treaty was signed. It froze the entire continent, banning military activity, mining, and national claims. In the middle of the Cold War, world powers suddenly agreed on one thing: no one touches Antarctica. For some, it was about protecting the environment. For others, it felt like a lockdown. A year before the moon landing, Stanley Kubrick released 2001, A Space Odyssey, a film so visually realistic that some wondered if it was more than fiction. Kubrick had worked with former NASA consultants, some of whom had ties to Operation Paperclip. The movie's portrayal of space travel was eerily close to what would unfold just months later. And then came the rumors that Kubrick had secretly helped film the moon landing, using his Hollywood expertise as a backup in case the real mission failed. There's no hard proof, but the theory refused to die, especially after Kubrick released The Shining in 1980. In it, the young boy wears an Apollo 11 sweater. He walks into room 237, a number some claim references the 237,000 miles to the moon. Was it a confession or just coincidence? We may never know. Operation Paperclip helped the US win the Cold War. It gave us rockets, medicine, satellites, and the moon landing. But it also gave us a legacy built on secrecy, compromise, and moral ambiguity. Nazi scientists became American heroes. War criminals became household names. Truth was rewritten, and history bent to serve power. And in the silence that followed, 1,000 questions remained. Thanks for watching The Lost Chapter. If this opened your eyes, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there's always another hidden story waiting to be uncovered. Forgotten history makes unforgettable stories.